You definitely don't need enterprise experience there. In fact, the less enterprise experience, the better. Sometimes I hire actually former. Those are the two skills that are really, really necessary to differentiate a PM from anyone else, because otherwise, honestly, anyone can write a PRD.
And now it's more about, building something that can make money and treating internal users with the same level of respect as your external customers.
I get a lot of fulfillment from delivering great value and great product to all of those people. The product needs to be enterprise ready and the organization needs to be enterprise ready. I think from a product perspective, it's really important, one, to have.
Hey, this is Carlos's AI voice clone. He is the CEO of Product School and the host of the Product Podcast. He asked me to set the stage for today's guest before he takes over the interview. Ilan Frank is the Chief Product Officer at Checkr, the leading background check company serving over 100,000 customers, including companies like Uber, Warby Parker, and Instacart. The company has raised $679 million in funding, with its last valuation at $5 billion. The industry standard for similar companies to process a background check takes 1 to 3 days. However, thanks to artificial intelligence, Checkr's product processes most background checks in 15 minutes or less. Ilan is spearheading the core business while driving product expansion into larger enterprises and new markets. He has extensive experience building SaaS products for large enterprises, having worked at other successful companies that went through the same transition like Slack, Airtable, and Grammarly. As an example, at Slack, he led the enterprise product team for 5 years, which ended up representing 70% of the company's revenue. In this episode, we'll explore how Ilan navigates the tricky path from SMB to enterprise success, including the importance of product readiness when going enterprise, balancing user delight with enterprise client needs, and strategies for scaling products to serve Fortune 500 companies. Let's dive in. Welcome to the show, Ilan.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here. I was checking out your LinkedIn profile and I found out we have 185 common connections. So that's a small world.
It is a small world. Probably not too many from my time in Minnesota growing up. Probably more from here in the Bay Area. But yes.
One of the fun facts that I got from you is that you are an avid home remodeler. Tell me more.
This is true. For some reason, I've done it 3 times now, and it's great. I've done everything from moving gas lines to building kitchens to bathrooms and really everything in between. So it's a lot of fun.
Is it?
It is. I find it to be very tangible. Software. That's one of my only criticisms of software is that it's usually not very tangible. You can't really touch it when you're done with it. And home remodeling is there, and you can see it and be proud of your work in a very visceral way. So I like it.
Oh man, I admire you. I wish I had that talent. I went through a home remodel once, and I promised myself that would be the last one.
Yeah. No, I understand. It takes a lot of weekends. So.
But let's talk product. I see that in addition to your role as a chief product officer at Checkr, you are also an advisor to Grammarly. Another fun fact, current CPO Noam Levinsky was a speaker at ProductCon San Francisco. So I know that company well. But very curious to know how you are able to combine your advisory work with your full-time job.
Yeah. Noam's great, by the way. I advise several companies, and usually as they make the transition from PLG, product-led growth, to SLG, that's typically where I have a lot of expertise. And I find it to be very, very interesting. And luckily for me, the last few companies that I've worked for have been fine with me spending time with other companies as long as it's not a direct competitor or anything like that. So I usually advise about 2 to 3 companies at a time. Not all of them are on my LinkedIn page.
And that's something, it's very top of mind for a lot of product leaders. And I'm always curious to know how the work that you do to help others actually helps you become an even better product leader.
Yeah. And first, a different answer, a different question here. How did I get involved into it is really, I think you have to focus. You have to focus in a certain area because for me, again, it's like I said earlier, it's enterprise. If I wasn't such a specialist in enterprise, if I was just a generalist, it would be a little bit less useful, I think, for most companies. So people bring me in again during that transition. And the way it helps me is that I get to also learn from all these companies that are making the same, journey, the same trajectory that I help companies usually make when I join. I learn also, quote unquote, for free, as they're experiencing it in real life. We're working through it together, so it's great learnings both ways.
Plus, you don't have to take accountability for that. You just give the advice.
It is a little bit, yes, it's a little bit less of accountability than my day job. And also just seeing different angles, because all these companies, they just represent different angles, different markets that they're going at. And so it's really fun.
Yeah, because I'm looking at your background. So I see you work at Slack,
Mhm.
Airtable. Funny enough, we also had one of the VPs from Slack, Jamie, on the podcast, and then
Oh
the
yeah.
current VP of product from Airtable, Anthony Maggio, as
Yes.
well.
Yes.
Uh,
Both
so
great.
tell me more about how those experiences, especially in the enterprise world, shaped your thinking as you continued building more enterprise products.
It's funny enough. I won't mention the company. I've done almost all enterprise. There was one time where I'll mention it. I interviewed at Facebook, and this is early on for Facebook. And the person that interviewed me looked at my resume that said, SAP and Plumtree and all these very enterprisey names. And she literally said, "What are you doing here?" And so that was basically the kind of the first and last time that I, tiptoed a little bit on the consumer side of things. Um, I really enjoy enterprise. It speaks to me because, and this actually became true more so when I became a parent. I think that the time that we spend away from our families is a very, sacred time in that it's purposeful. It should be purposeful. We should be doing something that we love. We should be doing something that we enjoy. Um, Me as a practitioner of enterprise software, if I can affect that time and make it more delightful, make it better for you, make it more productive for you, I feel like I've done a lot. I've done something that's really important. And so I look at enterprise software actually as something that is a lot more of an important mission than just making money. Sending some product out there and selling it to large customers or something like that. It's about the people that are working in those companies. And I get a lot of fulfillment from delivering great value and great product to all of those people.
I actually think that the word enterprise is becoming sexier. Back in the
Yeah.
day, it was all about B2C, consumer facing products, large scale. And now it's more about, okay, building something that can make money and treating the internal users with the same level of respect as your external customers.
In my history, as you've seen, I've also mostly focuses on productivity tools. And the reason why I focused on productivity tools is exactly that. You live and die by how productive you enable your users to be. If you don't design good software, if it doesn't deliver value, it's very difficult to sell productivity software. And I like that. I like being connected, being accountable for the value that I deliver.
Well, let's talk about your current company, Checkr.
Yeah, sure.
I'm a customer. I've been using it for a long time. I want to learn more about what's the latest and greatest.
Yeah. So just for people who don't know, Checkr is a background check company, but we've taken a very different approach at it, where most of the industry is comprised of companies that do manual checks, meaning they do a lot of research as the report is being investigated, and then come back with a dossier, so to speak, of the person that they ran the background check on. Checkr integrates into a lot of different data sources, compiles a lot of data, and uses a lot of machine learning in order to create that background check in a more automated fashion. So 85% of our background checks are processed in 15 minutes or less. And we're able to do that because of the vast amounts of information that we're able to gather, and because of the way we curate that information, and the way we use machine learning and AI to identify individuals, people within that data to make a holistic picture of an individual. So in short, it's a high-tech way to approach a world that has traditionally been low-tech.
Yeah, I remember. I mean, first of all, this company has been around for 10
About 10 years.
years.
Yeah, yeah,
I, I remember back in the day, doing background checks was an absolute ordeal.
yep.
So especially during the last 2.5 years, since you joined, like what are some of those specific innovations that you were able to drive?
Yeah. So first of all, I've only been a Checkr for about 11 months. So it's been just a little under 1 year. So I can't take credit for all the innovations that Checkr has had. But the thing that we're doing over the trajectory that the company is kind of going on and where we're at right now is that we started 10 years ago with Gig. And the reason why we started with Gig is that the founders of the company were actually the engineers themselves that were looking for an API for background check. They were looking for they were working for a delivery company. And as employees would register to be a driver, they wanted to run a background check via API very quickly and get the results. And they didn't find anything. There was nothing out there that was a background check. It was like, submit your paperwork, sometimes through fax, and then, come back with a few days later a background check. And they're like, this isn't going to work. The driver just, on the phone submitted an application. It's just not going to work. So they started Checkr as basically an API. And immediately it took off in the gig economy because of the need there. Then about 4 years ago, 4 years ago, they pivoted towards PLG. So all the SMBs in the world, how do they run background checks? Again, very difficult to do that. So can we take our API, put a beautiful interface on top of it, and serve those customers? And it just blew up from there. So it went from the handful of gig companies to now over 100,000 customers that are mostly the SMB customers. And now what we're doing is we're going towards enterprise and going and attracting the largest companies in the world that want to use more sophisticated tools. We'll talk a little bit later on about enterprise and going enterprise. But what they want is they need more sophisticated tools. It's beyond just an API. It's beyond just a simple interface.
Yeah, I like what you mentioned about the interface. That's in fact how we use it. I think it's through an integration with our application tracking system.
Yes, that's exactly right.
So as you think about implications of AI and from the risk standpoint, like how are you able to use it to prevent fraud and ensure that when you are checking someone's background, it's actually correct?
This is a difficult thing to do currently because it's a cat and mouse game. So we do use AI and we do use IDV, identity verification, to basically identify a person and verify the documents that they send to us to basically make sure that they are accurate, essentially. But it is a cat and mouse game, and so we are continuously innovating in this space with facial recognition, with ID recognition, with connecting to more and more data sources, so that we can verify whether the person that we're running the background check is in fact the person that shows up to the job.
Yeah, I hear you. I feel like that's like the a double-edged sword in a way, right? Like you have more capabilities now to do things faster. At the same time, the enemy has more options to also game the system.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't looked at candidates necessarily as an enemy, but so the way I think about it is that I want to make sure that we highlight, risks to the customer, who's the one running the background check, so they can take, appropriate actions. And those risks come in all kinds of different forms. And so sometimes it is fraud, but sometimes it's incomplete information. And so I also look at that as something that we need to be on top of. So we have the most complete, the most accurate, the most comprehensive background check. Because if you're making a hiring decision, you want to make sure that you have all of that information in front of you.
I want to talk about that, like internal AI use cases for you to
Yes.
make sure that you are running the process correctly. I mean, you've been working on AI for a long time, even before
For a long
Checkr.
time.
But when you joined Checkr, that was Gen AI was hot, right? So I wonder
Yes.
if there are any specific new things that you were able to integrate?
Yes, yeah. So quite a few things. So Gen AI on its own is a little bit less interesting in the background check space because what we're doing is generating an actual report of your background check, and so we don't want to artificially generate it or anything like that. Um, but we use AI a lot. So for example, this is all things that I've learned after joining Checkr. I didn't know this was so complicated. There are 3,400 or so different counties and therefore 3,400 different courthouses in the United States of America. Each one of them could actually label different charges in different ways, or sorry, the same charge in different ways. So shoplifting could be coded very differently in, Hennepin County, Minnesota, as it is in, Santa Clara County, California. And so someone that is evaluating a background check can't possibly look at all these different charges and understand what they are. And so we use AI to basically uh, convert or translate that charge into English so that you can actually read it and it all looks like something that is human readable rather than, a court code, which is what appears on someone's, record essentially. So that's one way that we use AI. We also are starting to use AI on the this is gonna. I'm trying to explain it without getting too details into how background check. So background check. Once a background check is done, there is a person called an adjudicator who basically looks at the background checks and makes a decision whether you want to hire the person or not. So we call the process adjudication, which is the process of basically looking at the background checking, making decisions. So during the adjudication process, we use AI to actually look for anomaly detections. And so if you have 10 people who are adjudicators at your company and one makes hiring decisions very differently than the other nine, you might want to know that. Maybe you have a training issue, or maybe you have a policy or procedure issue that is not being followed or something like that. And there's many other ways that we use, AI to basically make it a better experience for the customer.
And I can imagine that second case is even harder because you're trying to kind of create patterns based on humans versus in the first case, it's more of a black or white rule.
Yes. Yes. The second case is definitely harder. It's something that's in development right now. So we're testing it and getting feedback from customers. And you're right. But I think that there's a lot of promise in AI, obviously, but in the background check space specifically, it's a very, very complicated decision that needs to be made. You're weighing a lot of different, risks. And it's a job where you don't want to make a wrong decision either way. You don't want to not hire someone unfairly. You don't want to hire someone that doesn't comply and is out of compliance with your company policy. Um, and so today there's a lot of people who are manually, um, looking and making that decision. We don't think about these people, the adjudicators of the world. There's a lot of people out there that have a lot of stress in making this decision. If I can help deliver some tools that make their job much easier and they can be much more confident in that decision, I'd be very happy.
So I heard you mention that the value prop is that 85% of the background checks can be returned in under 15 minutes and that the
That's right.
industry benchmark is 1 to 3 days.
That's right.
What is that secret sauce that allows you to get to the value that much faster?
Well, I can't say all the secrets, but I will summarize it in saying that data is the summary. The more data we have access to, the better. Now, we can't have access to that much data and be able to have a report that is that runs that quickly unless we can understand unless we understand that data and we know how to process that data very, very quickly. So it's not just the amount of data, it's also the intelligence and how to process and look at that data. And understand. I don't have a middle name, so I can't use myself as an example.
Me
But
neither.
let's say I had a middle name. We'll go with Eric, Ilan Eric Frank, or Ilan E Frank, or something like that. understanding that that's the same person versus the other, Ilan Franks of the world or of, Santa Clara County, how, you know, understanding that is very, very important so that we can process much, much faster. So it's data and it's the intelligence of processing that information.
Got it. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about that tricky path to go from SMB up market.
Oh, yes.
Maybe we can start with the failure stories. I know that this is not the first time that Checkr tries to do that. So love to have more context as of those learnings.
Yes, it isn't. So about 4 years ago, Checkr, went before going to SMB. They wanted to go from gig to enterprise, and thought that would be the logical next step because it's a big market. Typically, I think that people underplay. We talked a little earlier on about enterprise being sexy. I think one of the reasons why enterprise is sexy is just people have realized that it's a huge market. Especially if you're talking about SMB versus larger enterprise, a lot of the data that I've collected over the years shows that about 60 to 70% of the market is enterprise, and enterprise meaning essentially it's defined differently by different people, but companies that have 1,000 employees or more. That's how many knowledge workers work in enterprise versus versus SMB or mid market. Again, depending on your definition of those segments. So it's a very important segment, and that's why we went after it. But I have a lot of scars on my back. There's a lot of ways. There are ways to do enterprise correctly, and there's ways not to do it, correctly. And running too quickly at it, and going after specific customers with specific demands and saying yes to a lot of them is definitely some scars on my back that I have, and something that Checkr ran into of how to not do it. We can talk a little bit about how to do it, but I'm happy to look deeper into that. It got to a point where we had to basically back away from enterprise as a company, and say we're not ready for enterprise. We're not going to do it, and that's when we basically went to SMB and really developed our product market fit as a non-API solution, as a holistic, background check solution where you use an interface and you get the background check and you process it and you adjudicate it and all the other things that you do. We had to get that product market fit before we went up market.
Yeah, I want to go into those details because I think there's a lot of commonalities with other products. Like people get excited about going up market. Of course, there's so many reasons to justify that, but then there's some friction. You mentioned one of the classic problems is, okay, big client wants something that your product doesn't have. And there's this clear situation where you have to decide, do I build a thing for that big client, knowing that maybe I cannot repurpose it for other clients? So how do you go about navigating those type of trade-offs?
Yeah, I mean, that is the essence of enterprise product management. But I will say, and we can talk about this later, but I will say that is an important decision or conversation to have only after you are actually ready to go enterprise and you're on that path, right? If you're making those decisions and you as a company and as a product are not even ready to go enterprise, that you're making the wrong decisions. You're gonna fail regardless. Basically, we could talk a little bit about when is the right time, but I'm happy to answer your question first, which is once you're on that path and you get these inbound requirements, what to do. I will steal a talking point actually from Adam Nash, who has and you can look it up, you can Google it, or it's on YouTube. He has a talk that's called 3 Buckets of Product Management. And he recommends to look at all of product features in kind of these 3 buckets. The first is the customer, or sorry, the metrics movers. These are the things that the company goals. This is where you want to go. These are features that are going to drive you forward as far as your strategy and your vision for your company. The second is customer asks, and the third is features of delight. And he's asked many times when he gets this talk, okay, so how do you know what percentage, each quarter as you're setting your kind of quarterly roadmap, do each one of those, fit? And his answer is basically, you don't. And that's not the point. There isn't a given percentage that's the right percentage. Sorry to spoil it. What's important is that you just have that conversation. Because if you're not somehow represented on all three of those, you're probably doing the wrong thing. And I've been a part of companies where we did only the customer asks. Our entire roadmap was basically what enterprise customers wanted from us. And you asked earlier, about failed cases. This is a failed enterprise case when you go after and say yes to every customer.
So what is the difference between the other two buckets, the one that is focused on your vision and the delighters?
So the ones that are focused on your vision could move the company maybe in a brand new direction. For example, you want at let me take it to let's talk about Airtable since this is public now. They've launched their now. I've left the company we recently spoke with, Anthony. They launched Product Central. So this is something that we were talking about a couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago or so. This is something that the company wanted to build as a out of the box piece of functionality. The customers weren't asking exactly for this, meaning they were asking for product features around product management, use cases, and all that. We could have built those features and said, okay, we're going to build the things that you were asking for specifically. But what we said was the company as a whole, as a mission, is to create more out of the box solutions. So let's go and build, an out of the box solution. It wasn't that that's exactly what customers were asking for. So that's even if customers weren't asking for it at all, we just knew that that's something that we needed to build. And so that is an example of basically the metrics movers. It's things that are associated with your company vision, with your, company goals for the year that you're going to go into. For Checkr, it will be at some point, I won't reveal when, international and going international. We run international background checks today. But there is a way to do it where we get a lot more data than we have today. And we have a much, much better turnaround time. So when do we invest in that? When do we do that? If I wait for customers to ask, that might be forever because the customers aren't asking because we're not in those countries necessarily. So I know I have to go and just build it and then put, salespeople on the ground in those countries. And then, we'll together, we will take over those markets. I'm not going to wait for customers to necessarily ask. So that this is where the metrics movers are something that we have to prioritize as an enterprise product organization. We think like GMs. We think about the business strategy.
What about the delighters?
Delighters are those, I view them as, this is maybe a negative way of viewing them, but I view them as retention features. Maybe this is a negative way of looking at it, but it's those things that customers would never ask for. They're not going to move metrics, but they create loyalty. The users that use your product, when they have these senses of delight, they feel like I've been heard. It's not even something I was going to ask for, but they knew my mind. They knew my, where my soul. And it might be cheesy, but that creates loyalty, creates love. It creates, positive tweets. So maybe it's a form of marketing, but I never think of it as marketing. I always think of it as, really, really just delighting, humans on the other side. So they feel like, like you've heard them.
Maybe I can give you an example about Grammarly, actually. I'm
Yeah.
sure that Noam will be happy. I'm a non-native English speaker. So I remember starting to use Grammarly integrated in my keyboard, my phone, and I would need to go and kind of ask Grammarly to go run the script to tell me what I did wrong, basically. But now there's an option to automatically correct things that are obvious, that do not need for me to go and double check. And that is such a time saver for me.
Right.
Because I actually feel hurt, not panic because I didn't get it right. It's almost like I can trust it more so I can continue moving faster.
Exactly. It's those types of things that in enterprise, the way I like to explain it to people who are making the transition is that the biggest difference with enterprise to consumer or even SMB or self-serve focus, PLG, is that in enterprise, you have a chooser and a user. And a lot of times your features are going to be actually focused on your chooser. So even think about like Salesforce, and let's take it, for example, SFA, their Salesforce automation, their first, product out. That's really a product that most of the features are tailored towards the chooser, the sales manager, the CRO, the person who's running a sales organization to be able to look at everything that's happening in their organization and be able to manage that sales organization. Not too many salespeople are excited about entering call notes into an SFA. So this was definitely not designed for them. And the feature requests that Salesforce got in the beginning were probably not, I need an easier way to enter call notes or something like that. It was probably from the chooser, from the people who had budget that they had conversations of, saying, I want to be able to, manage more people. I want to be able to do automatic territory assignment. I want to be able to do quote to cash, all these kind of features. But every once in a while, sneaking in a nice thing for the salesperson is great. It just makes that user's day better. And it drives, loyalty. So when that, sales manager says, is it all right? Is it working? The salespeople can say, yeah, you know what? It was such a pleasure to enter those call notes. It did it automatically, integrated with Gong or whatever. And it just all happened right there. I hardly had to do anything. That's great. That's something that I think is important to prioritize. Now, how much of that do you do? It's obviously not 50%. But that's up to you depending on the company.
Yeah, but that's a good point. There's a bucket and there's a conversation to be had, and not
Yeah.
forget that having some elements of delight are important as well.
Yeah, exactly.
But you mentioned that even before deciding what to do with enterprise clients, it's important to have a conversation around being enterprise ready.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Yeah. So the way I look at it is that you need basically two things to be ready, and then we can dive into those two things. The product needs to be enterprise ready, and the organization needs to be enterprise ready. And the product is a 1 and 0. It's binary. Like if you're not ready, you're just going to fail. And we talk about what I mean by product being ready. And then the organization is more a gradient of, if you're not quite ready, it's just not going to be quite as successful. But there's ways to get around it. If you are ready, you're more likely to have success. So let's separate those two things out and talk about maybe the product first. I think from a product perspective, it's really important, one, to have some type of product market fit. Before you start scaling, it's important to know that the product works. If you scale too early, it's just going to be I think a very, very tough journey, basically. And so that's the first thing, is that when I started at Slack, I joke a lot that I started when Slack was 2 years old, and already about $50 million in ARR. I joke that the company would have been a failure had I joined day 0, because it was just too soon. That you need to have that product market fit. You need to have the ability to say, okay, we know what problem we're solving for these users. Now, when I come in is usually when now we're ready to focus on the choosers. Okay, so we know what problem we're solving for the users, but now we need to focus on the choosers. Now, it's complicated. It's a little more complicated than that, because a lot of people think, well, choosers, that means security and administration and all that. Not necessarily. Yes, those things are required from a product perspective, and you want to start focusing on those. And so when I say ready, by the way, I don't mean you've built all those things. You're ready to build all those things, right? But also, you know what problem you're solving for the chooser that is maybe more important than just security and administration. Those are tick boxes to get into the door. Those aren't the problems that you're solving. So at Slack, what we were solving was organizational alignment. Was for a CTO or a CPO or a CRO to say, I know now where all of my deals are and what stage they're in, and I can come into a conversation or a deal desk review, and I can have the conversation because it's in a channel and I know where it is, rather than being locked away in email. Or we have feature channels for every feature, So I can very easily involve everyone, or I have incident channels for incidents. So I can now answer, I can reply to incidents, or I can solve incidents in a much faster way. So that's who care. The people normally who care about those things are the people who own the metrics, who are, the choosers, so to speak. Those were the problems we were solving for the choosers. It wasn't just security administration and compliance.
But it feels like a chicken and egg problem because you have a good product for the users.
Yeah.
You are technically not ready for the choosers, yet you also need to connect with them to fully understand what they need in order for you to be ready for them, right? So how do you close that feedback loop?
So step one, make sure that you have a good product for the users. Step two, um, identify the choosers, right? So if your product is, let's take for example, Airtable is a great example of this that went up market and went enterprise. Um, the initial many times Airtable is brought in by a small team. It's usually not one person, but it's a 2 or 3 people because it's a collaborative product. To replace a spreadsheet. So there's some workflow that happened in a spreadsheet, and now a small team has brought it in and started to use it as a replacement that has much more workflow and coding and all. So now, what department are they in? Where are they working? What's this one use case? Are there many other use cases that we can solve for them? And so you do the research, you talk to the users, and you start understanding basically what's broken, what's happening. And out of that comes that, you know what? There just aren't a very good, marketing solutions for the marketing department. So a lot of users at Airtable, Anthony probably spoke about this, use it to manage, digital assets or marketing assets, basically. And so, all right, what can we do that maybe is at a CMO level, or at a VP of marketing, or at a VP of product marketing, as features are rolled out to the sales organization, sales enablement, and all that? Is that a use case we can solve? So you start looking at adjacency from those users up the organizational stack to bigger problems that are related, but serve a broader purpose. And then, okay, what features then? You go have the conversation. What features do we need to, what's that market? Who's playing in that market? What features do we need to build? Do we have a right to win? It's very much like a startup, but it's a startup that already has some love and product market fit. So you're standing already on success. And then you work that out and test it out and co-develop it with certain enterprise customers and go from there.
I like all the examples you are providing because they all start with user love, right? There is some
This one.
sort of PLG motion that already gave you the right to have that conversation. There are people who are finding value. So now it's more about who else can find value or how we can even maximize the value for existing users.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Now, there are, of course, examples of enterprise companies that don't do that, where it's, let's say, some type of intrusion detection software for security, where you don't have users using it, you just go and sell it to the CISO, and so you don't have that luxury that I've had in my past of having users that use and love the product. So that doesn't mean that it's very different from what I just said. It's just ignoring the user stuff. You're really doing, more of an assessment of TAM and pain and all that. It's very similar to the enterprise research that I was talking about. You're just not starting from the user.
So I'm clear on the enterprise product readiness. Anything else to add there before we move to the enterprise org readiness?
No, I think that's the key thing is really, again, product market fit and then doing the design. So let's move to org. So as far as org readiness, enterprise product management can't happen in a vacuum. You have to work with engineers, obviously, and you have to work with the go-to-market. Those three have to be really working in unison. So what that means is that, and what I advise companies that I work with that are going through this growth stage is to set up an enterprise team. Don't have just an enterprise PM and then have that PM mapped to, other teams within core. where there's going to be conflict. We talked about the buckets, right? And so if imagine those buckets, and every quarter you have that conversation, and the enterprise PM is like, well, McKinsey wants this feature here. And all the core PMs and all the engineers like, yeah, okay, but we're developing these really cool user features that are going to be awesome. You're going to love it. Who's going to win? And so you can't have that conversation. You've got to have engineers that are mapped to PMs that are a separate area that do it. At Slack, we started with 14 engineers and 2 PMs when we started to focus on enterprise. We just carved that out of the main, kind of like core. We were all focused on just end users, essentially, in small companies, and we carved out a team of 14 and said, let's go tackle enterprise. And by that, again, we meant companies that are 1,000 employees and above. So that's really important. And then from the go-to-market perspective, you've got to be ready with go-to-market. You've got to have sellers that are ready to do that type of direct sale, that going to companies, outbound marketing, outbound selling, and be able to to serve those customers well. Otherwise, it's not gonna work very well.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I see the value in building kind of a business unit for that enterprise product. Because there are distinct go-to-market motions, distinct product requirements, and all the other things. One of the challenges that I see there, and I want to get your thoughts on, is okay, if you have this separate enterprise product team, not just with an enterprise PM, but with dedicated enterprise engineers, how do you ensure that they're at least keeping an eye on what core product is doing? So hopefully there are some synergies and you don't kind of push those two products too far away.
Well, I look at it the opposite way around, which is how do you have core keep an eye on what enterprise is doing? Because if we've determined that 70% of the revenue is going to come from enterprise, then at some point it should be a top priority for the whole company. And at which point, I've had experience where it sometimes isn't, because because core isn't focused as much on the needs of the chooser. They're really still focused exclusively on the needs of the user. And so there are techniques to do that. I think the question that you asked, the opposite of enterprise, focusing on the customer. It's funny. I'll tell you a small story. When I joined Slack, it was again 2 years into Slack. Stuart Butterfield met me that first day and gave me a hug and said, "I'm so glad you're here. Don't mess up the product." He used a different 4-letter word than mess, by the way. But I understood what he meant. I understood and respected what he meant. There was a lot of love that Slack, had, and the last thing that was needed was to make it all, enterprisey and boring, and something that looked like something that was not easy to use, and so forth. And that was obviously not ever my intention. But I think that modern enterprise PMs, maybe 20, 30 years ago, you would see enterprise PMs that were very out of touch with what a good interface should look like. I honestly have not seen that. Maybe it's the 3 companies that I've been to in the last 10 years, but I honestly haven't seen that in the last 10 years of my career. Is those enterprise PMs that create screens that it's like, oh man, I can't use that. That's awful. I have also been very fortunate to work with amazing designers. So I think that as you go enterprise, it's important to have an equally powerful design organization. And when I hire for enterprise PM, I usually hire for enterprise experience. We can talk a little bit about what that enterprise experience is, what's important to look for there. When I hire for designers, I definitely don't need enterprise experience there. In fact, the less enterprise experience, the better, so that they're really thinking about the individual that is using the experience, or the interface, rather than what does an enterprise company want.
Yeah, I'm very interested in that point, because the connotation that enterprise has sometimes is what you said. It's maybe ugly, slower, and whatever. So when you go to market and try to acquire talent, how much weight do you put into someone having enterprise experience versus saying, hey, maybe I'm hiring someone here from consumer that can bring something new to my enterprise product?
Luckily, we have moved away from the days where PMs would do their own wireframes. I'm old enough to remember those days where the end of the PM job was to put together a wireframe. We don't do that anymore. So now we have designers that make incredible, interfaces that really, I think, are a pleasure, to use, um, and at the same time, really answer the needs of, the enterprise user. And so the PM's job now is much less, that, and much more thinking like a GM. And I purposely don't use the word CEO. You're not the boss. You're not the boss of anyone. Um, but you do need to think like a GM. You need to understand the metrics of the business. How does the business run? So finance background is usually pretty good, actually, for enterprise PMs. Um, uh, the other thing that you're doing is you're working, of course, very closely with customers. I'm on the road a lot and meet with customers, and I think a good enterprise PM is on the road a lot, meeting with customers. So sometimes I hire actually former CSMs, people who really are advocating for customers, who really understand customers and advocate for them. But those are the two skills that are really, really necessary that differentiate a PM from anyone else. Because otherwise, honestly, anyone can write a PRD. It's not that we are so special because we can write a PRD. Now AI is writing PRDs. So it's really the understanding the business. It's a combination of understanding the business and going out and really being an advocate for customers at the same time, combining those into what is going to push the company forward as quickly as possible towards the company goal, given those two inputs.
And how much do you involve your enterprise PMs into the actual sales process? You mentioned that you are on the road a lot. You want PMs to talk to customers, but to what extent are they actually accountable for revenue?
Um, Not necessarily accountable for revenue. However, I like joint goals. If we have company goals that are revenue-based company goals, I like that. Even though, there's only one department that has a quota and all that, I want to feel my goal from an enterprise perspective, like Nirvana, is that I develop a software that's so great that the salesperson walks in the room, shows one demo, and the customer is like, "Where do I sign?" Then I've done my job. So I think that building empathy with the sales organization is really important part of enterprise sales. Otherwise, how do you know? I learned a lot about our differentiation when I go talk to customers. That's when I can read a competitor's website, but that doesn't tell me anything. When I go and actually talk to customers is when I actually understand how we're doing or where we're not doing well compared to competitors. Now, it's not all about competitors, by the way. That's not, I don't want to make it sound like that's the most important thing, but there's a lot of things like that you pick up. The most important thing is value and delivering value to customers. And so, how do I know exactly that the software that we're building is really delivering value? There's some metrics I can measure, but going and talking to customers, there's no substitute to really understanding whether there's a visceral, value.
Thank you, Ilan. So just to switch gears one last time, as you think
Sure.
about the future, I heard a few uh, hints that you gave me. One was international expansion, but I'm also curious to
Yes.
see what else is in your bucket list.
For Checkr specifically.
Uh-huh.
So I thought you meant home improvement. We can talk about that too, but no. So for Checkr, we're still on the very much on the path towards enterprise. We really just started this about a year ago, and we're going all out on that. And enterprise is a multi-year journey. It doesn't take 1 year. It took me at Slack really 5 years, 4 or 5 years to fully build out the enterprise product. We had early successes, but it took 4 or 5 years to really build out this enterprise product that was, again, represented 70% of the revenue. So it takes a while. So I don't want to rush it, and I don't want to not focus on or focus on other things, or have a scattershot approach. So we're focused very much on it. At the same time, you mentioned that you connect through partners. That's something that I want to explore much more of. If you're doing either an ATS, a hiring solution, or an HRIS, you're onboarding someone. In each one of those instances, you want to be able to do a background check very easily. And I want to be able to be there as easily as possible and as natively as possible. So it looks like the experience that you're used to. You don't have to switch gears and, hand off a lot of information. So I want to make it natural. And then the process, I want to make the process very, very easy. So that it's delightful. So that's delightful for the candidate that's going through the experience, and it's delightful for the for the customer. And the last thing is, interestingly enough, we've had a lot of requests for personal background checks where people want to run background checks on themselves or on household employees like nannies or babysitters or something like that. And we see through our traffic, when we analyze our traffic, that a lot of people are coming and doing that. So we want to be able to serve that audience and give them an experience that is delightful.
Ilan, thank you so much for this masterclass on enterprise product.
Absolutely. My pleasure.